These are 13 films that didn't fail because audiences rejected them. They failed because Hollywood wanted them to fail. From deliberate burial campaigns to tax write-off cancellations, the very industry that created these movies systematically destroyed them. And this is the story of Studio Sabotage. Warner Brothers has spent over 50 years actively suppressing this film. Ken Russell directed The Devils in 1971, and what happened next goes beyond simple box office disappointment because the studio tried to erase its own movie from existence. When executives first screened the completed film, they reportedly called it disgusting shite. Rather than shelving it and taking the loss, they started cutting it apart piece by piece. 4 minutes of footage disappeared before the film even reached British censors, and the studio kept demanding additional cuts even while the movie played in theaters. Ken Russell felt trapped, admitting that short of burning the entire film, he had no choice, and calling the American version disjointed and incomprehensible after all the studio interference. Warner Brothers has never released The Devils on DVD or Blu-ray anywhere in North America. When the British Film Institute tried to arrange a UK release in 2012, Warner's blocked permission entirely. Film critic Mark Kermode discovered the long-lost footage sitting in a Warner Brothers storage warehouse back in 2002, and the studio still refuses to authorize its release. Guillermo del Toro put it plainly in 2014, stating that powers exist at Warner Brothers who refuse to allow this movie to be seen. After 5 decades, The Devils remains a hostage held by the company that made it. William Friedkin's gripping thriller, Sorcerer, stands as the cautionary tale of what happens when two studios share a film and neither one cares enough to save it. Everything lined up with a visionary director and genuine critical potential, but no studio stepped up when the fight mattered most. The original budget came in at $2.5 million, and by completion that number had ballooned to $22 million. The real problem came down to timing because Sorcerer opened June 24, 1977, exactly 1 month after Star Wars began its historic run. Mann Theaters had locked in a contract to show Sorcerer at Mann's Chinese Theater, which meant Star Wars had to vacate temporarily. Those famous lines stretching around the block disappeared within a week, and after one contractually mandated week, the theater pulled Sorcerer so Star Wars could return. Universal and Paramount co-produced the film, which meant neither studio championed it as their own. Gene Siskel theorized that each company assumed the other would handle promotion. Film editor Bud Smith remembered the devastating moment, saying the Star Wars trailer made their film look like an amateurish piece of échec and telling Friedkin they were being blown off the screen. The domestic gross landed at just $5.9 million, when Roger Ebert estimated $45 to $50 million to break even. Today, Sorcerer holds 84% on Rotten Tomatoes, with filmmakers like Stephen King and Quentin Tarantino calling it a masterpiece. Terry Gilliam's fantasy epic represents one of the most explicitly documented cases of internal studio sabotage. The Adventures of Baron Munchausen wasn't destroyed by a competing studio. It got buried by Columbia Pictures after a regime change left the project orphaned. $25 million, that's where the budget started, and by wrap, that number had swelled to $46 million. David Putnam greenlit the project as Columbia's CEO, and his ouster in October 1987 changed everything when Dawn Steele took over. Steele made her position clear, stating that whatever David Putnam had said before held no interest for her. Gilliam tried separating his film from the political fallout, telling anyone who would listen that this wasn't a David Putnam movie, but a Terry Gilliam movie. None of it worked. Columbia released Baron Munchausen on only 117 prints across America, and Gilliam pointed out the absurdity by exclaiming that an art film gets 400. Robin Williams compared the situation to nature, calling it like watching the new lion that ends all the cubs from the previous male. Effects supervisor Kent Houston tried to collect payment and got told they wouldn't pay because they didn't want to do anything that could benefit Terry Gilliam. The domestic gross limped in at $8.1 million, despite 4 Academy Award nominations. Gilliam found dark humor in the outcome, remarking that it seemed appropriate Munchausen, the greatest liar, should become a victim of some of the greatest liars in the world. Hollywood turned Ishtar into shorthand for expensive disaster, but substantial evidence points to deliberate sabotage by Columbia Pictures' own CEO. Director Elaine May's adventure comedy starred Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman, with a budget between $40 and $55 million. David Putnam became head of Columbia during post-production, and he brought documented grudges against both lead actors with him. Putnam had declared Warren Beatty should be spanked in public for the budget of his 1981 film Reds, and he'd labeled Hoffman the most malevolent person he had ever worked with. Multiple witnesses confirmed negative stories leaked to media during Putnam's tenure. Artistic consultant Philip Shopper described the feeling among insiders that many stories were instigated by Putnam, or at least released with his blessings, and trade publications started calling the project Warrensgate. On press screening day, the Los Angeles Times ran a devastating article featuring Putnam attacking his own production. Director Mike Nichols called it the prime example he knew of in Hollywood of studio self-destruction. Elaine May never directed another feature film. Against a massive budget, the final domestic gross landed at just $14.3 million. Last Action Hero stands as the textbook example of strategic counterprogramming designed to crush a competitor. Arnold Schwarzenegger's meta-action comedy didn't fail on its own merits because it got steamrolled by dinosaurs before audiences could even give it a chance. Columbia had committed to June 18, 1993 as the release date, and that's when Universal made their move by shifting Jurassic Park to June 11th. Exactly 1 week earlier. Universal poured over $60 million into promotion and lockdown tie-ins with Hasbro and McDonald's that saturated the marketplace with dinosaur merchandise. According to reports from the time, Schwarzenegger himself begged the studio to delay the release date after sitting through an early screening of Jurassic Park. He recognized immediately that Last Action Hero couldn't possibly compete with Spielberg's dinosaur spectacle. Columbia refused to budge from their date. Opening weekend brought in $15.3 million from over 2,000 theaters, and in isolation, that number might seem respectable. But against the Spielberg juggernaut still dominating screens, it looked like failure. The cinema score came back at C+. Co-star Charles Dance offered a measured observation years later, noting that they just didn't time the release very well and that the film came out more or less at the same time as something very big. $50 million in domestic gross against an $85 million budget, that's where Last Action Hero ended up. The cult following that developed over the years vindicated the film's meta-humor and deconstructive approach to action cinema, and audiences appreciate it far more now than they did back in 1993. When Fox Animation released Anastasia, Disney didn't settle for competition. They launched what looked like a coordinated assault to kneecap their rival's most ambitious project. Don Bluth directed Anastasia on a $53 million budget, with $50 million more for marketing, opening November 21, 1997. 1 week earlier, Disney re-released The Little Mermaid, claiming the timing had long been planned. Fox's Bill Mechanic called it a deliberate attempt to be a bully and kick sand in Fox's face, concluding it amounted to a concentrated effort to keep Anastasia from fulfilling its potential. Disney pushed even harder by releasing Flubber the following weekend and a George of the Jungle and Hercules double feature. They banned Anastasia advertisements from ABC's The Wonderful World of Disney and prohibited corporate sponsors from showing Anastasia clips in commercials. Screenwriter Bruce Graham noted Disney re-released The Little Mermaid just to knock $3 million off the opening weekend. Despite all interference, Anastasia succeeded by grossing $140 million worldwide. Disney acquired Fox in 2019 and now owns the very film they once tried to undermine. The battle between Antz and A Bug's Life remains the most thoroughly documented case of alleged idea theft in animation history, and it all stems from one of Hollywood's bitterest executive feuds. Jeffrey Katzenberg had served as Disney's studio chairman from 1984 to 1994, overseeing the animation renaissance that revitalized the company. When Frank Wells passed away in April 1994, Katzenberg expected promotion to president, and CEO Michael Eisner refused to give it to him. Internal documents surfaced later revealing that Eisner had written, "I think I hate the little midget." Disney fired Katzenberg just weeks after The Lion King opened, and his lawsuit against the company ultimately settled for $270 million. Pixar had been developing their insect movie since 1995, and Steve Jobs stated the situation bluntly. He pointed out that nobody could dispute the fact that on the day Jeffrey left Disney, he knew Pixar was making A Bug's Life and knew everything about the project. John Lasseter remembered his conversations with Katzenberg with growing unease. Katzenberg started talking about paranoid conspiracies and how Disney was out to get him, and Lasseter realized it wasn't about him at all, that Pixar had become cannon fodder in Katzenberg's fight with Disney. Disney scheduled A Bug's Life for November 1998, the same weekend as DreamWorks' Prince of Egypt. Katzenberg offered to delay Antz if Disney moved A Bug's Life, and Jobs called this blatant extortion. Katzenberg responded by shifting Antz from March 1999 to October 1998, beating Pixar to market. Antz grossed $171 million worldwide, while A Bug's Life pulled in $363 million, and the incident established DreamWorks as a legitimate Disney rival that would produce Shrek just 3 years later. Today, The Iron Giant ranks among the greatest animated films ever made, but in 1999, almost nobody saw it because Warner Brothers abandoned their own masterpiece before audiences had a chance to discover it. Brad Bird's directorial debut carried a budget between $48 and $50 million, and test screening scores reportedly came back as the highest Warner Brothers had seen in 15 years. None of that mattered to the people making decisions. Warner Brothers didn't even set a release date until April 1999, just 4 months before the August opening. Marketing materials amounted to one teaser poster that ended up becoming the theatrical poster by default. Burger King toy tie-in discussions went nowhere. No cereal partnerships materialized, no fast food deals, no merchandise of any kind. The studio diverted resources to promote Wild Wild West instead, a critically reviled film carrying a $170 million budget that executives deemed more commercial. The LA Daily News captured the situation perfectly with their headline reading, "Giant Disappointment, Warner Brothers blew a chance to market terrific film while iron was still hot." Brad Bird acknowledged his own role in the disaster years later, explaining that Warner's had intended to shelve the film entirely, and he stupidly said no because he felt cocky about how good the test scores looked. They released it anyway, and nobody knew what the hell it was. The domestic gross landed at $23.1 million against the budget. Today, the film holds 96% on Rotten Tomatoes and collected 9 Annie Awards. Bird went on to direct The Incredibles and Ratatouille, winning 2 Academy Awards along the way. Fox systematically abandoned Titan AE months before it even reached theaters, and Don Bluth's ambitious animated sci-fi film became collateral damage in the studio's pivot away from traditional animation. The budget ran somewhere between $75 and $90 million, but in February 2000, with the June release still months away, Fox fired 2/3 of the 320 employees at their Phoenix animation studio. Production got abruptly outsourced to other facilities, including Blue Sky. Co-director Gary Goldman described those final months as a battle with creative executives at Fox while racing toward the finish line, and he called it not fun filmmaking. The film received sporadic promotion beyond occasional TV spots, while Fox concentrated resources on X-Men, which executives considered more commercial. Goldman admitted the marketing challenge directly when he noted the film wasn't mother-friendly and that he didn't think anybody under 8 years old should see it, which suggested nobody had figured out who the target audience actually was. Opening weekend landed Titan AE at number 5 with $9.4 million, and the second weekend drop exceeded 60%. Worldwide gross reached just $36.8 million against that massive budget. Fox Animation Studios shut down 10 days after release. Don Bluth hasn't directed another theatrical feature since. Nearly 2 decades of passion got sabotaged by internal studio politics when Treasure Planet finally reached screens. Directors Ron Clements and John Musker had fought since 1985 to make their Treasure Island in space vision, and when Disney finally allowed the project to move forward, the studio appeared to ensure its failure. $140 million. That's what the budget reached, with approximately $40 million more for marketing. Clements and Musker first pitched the concept back in 1985 and got rejected in favor of The Little Mermaid. After Aladdin became a massive success, studio chief Jeffrey Katzenberg still showed no interest and actively blocked the project. The directors bypassed Katzenberg entirely by approaching Roy E. Disney directly, and he supported their vision. After Disney fired Katzenberg and he co-founded DreamWorks, Treasure Planet finally got the green light, but new executives allegedly viewed the whole project as a thorn in their side. The release date choice tells the story clearly. Treasure Planet opened November 27, 2002 against Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets in its 3rd week, and Disney's own The Santa Claus 2 in its 5th week of release. Reports suggest CEO Michael Eisner held a press conference the day after opening to declare Treasure Planet a flop and blame it for Disney's poor 3rd quarter performance. The domestic gross reached $38.2 million, and Disney took a $74 million write-down on the project. A strong cult following has developed over the years, particularly among millennials who discovered it later. Valerian stands apart from other films on this list because the wounds came largely from self-inflicted decisions, but the damage from counter-programming still proved devastating. Luc Besson's passion project became the most expensive European and independent film ever produced at $177 to $180 million, with approximately $60 million more going toward marketing. Besson had staked his claim on July 21, 2017, more than 2 years before release. Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk opened the same weekend, earning $50.5 million on opening weekend before going on to gross $525 million worldwide. Valerian carried marketing built around a see it on the biggest screen experience, but the film couldn't access IMAX theaters because Dunkirk controlled them. Deadline asked the question everyone was thinking, wondering how you sell a movie as see it on the biggest screen when it doesn't have access to any of the biggest screens. The domestic gross stopped at $40.4 million. EuropaCorp lost $136 million for the fiscal year and accumulated $251 million in debt. Batgirl represents something unprecedented in Hollywood history. A $90 million film that reached completion and then got permanently shelved for tax benefits. Warner Bros. Discovery didn't just fail to release this movie, they made it legally impossible to ever release. Filming wrapped in March 2022, and Discovery merged with Warner Media in April 2022 through a $43 billion deal. On August 2, 2022, Warner Bros. Announced that the completed film would never see release. Financial engineering drove the decision because post-merger rules allowed WBD to claim full production costs as acquisition-related write-offs. Tax attorney David Bloom explained the logic by noting that if you write something off as a worthless investment, you get a deduction, comparing it to a business venture that fails. Directors Adil El Arbi and Bilal Fallah responded with disbelief, expressing sadness and shock at the news, and stating they still couldn't believe it. They emphasized that as directors, showing their work to audiences remained critical to them. Unlike other shelved projects that might surface someday, the tax write-off structure legally prevents WBD from ever monetizing or releasing Batgirl. The film sits in a vault, never to be seen. Coyote vs. Acme became the cancellation that sparked an industry revolt, ultimately proving that public backlash could reverse a studio's decision. The Looney Tunes hybrid film carried a budget between $70 and $72 million, and test screenings produced extraordinary results with scores landing 14 points above the family norm. Writer Ben David Grabinski called it the best of its kind since Roger Rabbit. On November 9, 2023, Warner Bros. Discovery announced this would become the third completed film shelved for tax purposes, following Batgirl and Scoob, Holiday Haunt. Backlash erupted immediately and fiercely. Voice actor Eric Bauza took the stage at the Annie Awards and proclaimed in character as Daffy Duck that he hated to be political, but demanded they release Coyote vs. Acme. Within 4 days, WBD reversed course and allowed the film to be shopped to other distributors. Netflix, Paramount, Amazon, and Apple all screened the film, and multiple studios made formal offers. WBD rejected all bids by demanding $75 to $80 million, more than the production had actually cost. U.S. Representative Joaquin Castro condemned WBD's tactic of scrapping fully made films for tax breaks as predatory and anti-competitive, calling for FTC review. March 2025 brought resolution when Ketchup Entertainment acquired the film for approximately $50 million. Theatrical release is scheduled for August 28, 2026. These 13 films reveal an uncomfortable truth about Hollywood, that sometimes the enemy isn't audiences or critics or changing tastes. Sometimes the enemy is the system itself. Warner Brothers suppressed the Devils for 50 years while the tax write-off era produced Batgirl, and though tactics evolved over the decades, the pattern remained constant throughout. Regime changes orphan inherited projects, counter-programming crushes competition, and marketing budgets evaporate the moment executives decide a film isn't worth saving. The irony is that history has vindicated many of these supposed failures. Sorcerer became a Criterion Collection masterpiece. The Iron Giant collected 9 Annie Awards, and Baron Munchausen earned 4 Oscar nominations despite its burial. Perhaps the most telling recent example came in 2023 when Warner Bros. Moved Barbie to the same date as Oppenheimer, reportedly as revenge against Universal for taking Christopher Nolan. Producer Margot Robbie got asked to move her date, and her response became legendary. She stated flatly that they weren't moving their date and that if the other side was scared to be up against them, then they should move their date. Both films became massive hits with their combined opening weekend producing the fourth largest in U.S. box office history. Nolan observed that those who care about the theatrical experience have been longing for a crowded marketplace with a lot of different movies. Sometimes the best revenge against studio sabotage turns out to be simply too good to fail.